Thank you all for joining us today. Welcome to the Monitoring and Evaluating Climate Communication and Education Projects webinar series. I am Nicola Chopin, the project manager of the MECCE project, and I am based in the University of Saskatchewan in Canada. I'd just like to start by taking a moment to acknowledge that as we gather in this virtual space together, I am joining you from Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the MECCE. And I just like to express my respect for the First Nations and Métis ancestors of this beautiful land that I currently call home. I invite you all to introduce yourselves using the chat function. You can let us know where in the world you are joining us from, your role, who you work for, and if you are comfortable and would like to do so, I invite you to write your own land acknowledgement. Please note that we are recording the webinar to share on our YouTube page. And I'd just like to ask that you keep your microphones and videos muted to help preserve bandwidth and avoid distractions. Some of the people that are joining us today may not have the best internet speeds. Just to begin today's webinar, I would like to briefly introduce the MECCE project. We are a 6-year research policy partnership funded by the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. We are a partnership of over 100 partners and collaborators, all working together to improve the quality and increase the quantity of climate change communication and education globally. And our team is preparing case studies from around the world, developing indicators to monitor progress of climate change education and communication, and sharing knowledge through research briefs, a global blog, publications, and quite a few other types of activities, including this webinar. This webinar is part of a series that explores topics related to climate change communication and education research, policy, and practice. And I am delighted to introduce the webinar's moderator, Srishti Singh, today. Srishti leads the climate change programs at the Center for Environment Education in India, which is a valued MECCE project partner. Srishti has led youth climate change campaigns and has worked on international, national, and subnational programs. She attended last year's UN climate conference, COP26, as part of the Center for Environment Education delegation. And Srishti helps coordinate the MECCE project's regional hub for Australasia, which the Center of Environment Education is the co-chair. She is also assisting the MECCE project team in developing country profiles on climate change, communication, and education. And I'm thrilled to hand it over to you, Srishti. So please take it away.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction, Nicola, and for the invitation to moderate today's webinar. Good morning, everyone from India. Hope you are having a great time. So as Nicola already mentioned, today's webinar is all about youth participation in decision-making and with the focus on climate communication and education. Giving a brief about why youth and why decision-making is the agenda of this webinar. So as you might have learned or you might have been studying, youth can bring fresh and innovative perspectives to decision-making and policy-making when it comes to climate change education, and have the potential to lead their communities in these processes. However, you might have also known that youth are often excluded from such processes, and also their inclusion has been tokenistic. There have been a lot of studies and experiences around that also. The webinar also showcases examples of youth participation in policy and decision-making processes at both intergovernmental and local levels, and will also be exploring barriers and enablers that help meaningful participation and engagement of youth in such processes. So this was all about the webinar, but of course we have two esteemed speakers with us who have joined from varied time zones today to be here with us, and we are pleased to invite them and join us, and we are happy that they have joined us with their significant expertise in climate change communication and education decision making. We have Heeta Lakhani, who is the YOUNGO Global Focal Point, who was the YOUNGO Global Youth Focal Point between 2020 and 2021. And then we have Lucy Skelton, the founder and CEO of the Student Voice Network. Welcome, Heeta and Lucy, to the webinar. Heeta and Lucy will each be presenting for about 15 minutes, and then we will open the floor for discussions later after the speaking session if both the speaking sessions are done. Of course, we would like to make this webinar as engaging and as interactive as possible, and also a little bit manageable on Zoom for Nicola. But we are pleased, we will be happy if you could write your questions for the speakers as we go in the chat box, as Nicola has already mentioned. And during the discussion later after the speaking sessions, you could also use the hand raise function, and then I'll call on you to unmute your mic, and we can have a live question session there as well. So that was a brief background and some housekeeping rules. Now going ahead with the first speaker session. Our first speaker for the day is Heeta Lakhani. Welcome, Heeta. I hope you are here. Till then, I hope you're here. I'm not able to see you. Yes, here you are. So Heeta is a climate educator from Mumbai, India. She has a master's degree in environmental studies and resource management from Teddy University, which is based in New Delhi. She has been active at the local as well as international level since the COP21, which happened in Paris during 2015. Heeta aims to create change makers who will take knowledge-based action in order to combat the climate crisis. She is a firm believer in the participation and power of youth in grassroots as well as international processes and policies. Heeta wears multiple hats. She serves as a coordinator of the Youth Empowerment in Climate Actions platform for UNDP Asia Pacific Regional Hub. She's the founder of the Climate Initiative in India. And as I already mentioned, she was the global youth focal point for YOUNGO, the official youth constituency of the UNFCCC during 2020-2021. Thank you for joining us today, Heeta, and the floor is all yours. You're on mute, I guess.
Yeah, thank you so much. My computer is acting a little funny today, but anyway, all good for now. Thank you so much for Srishti, and thank you, Nicola, for having us today and for organizing this session. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with all of you. Like Srishti mentioned, I've been doing a few different things, and my journey started after I finished my master's in environmental studies. So I always wanted to be in the field of environment. I saw a lot of different development activities in my home city of Bombay, which sort of stirred me to want to be a part of, being a part of the solution instead of being a part of the problem. And this eventually led me to do a master's in environmental studies. But after I finished that, I came back home from Delhi, and while I was still, looking for jobs and what I wanted to do, figuring that out, I started learning German, and eventually a year later started working as a German language translator. So I did nothing that I had just spent 2 years of my life studying. But this was when the trajectory changed. While I absolutely enjoyed my job, this was in 2015 when COP21 was going to be taking place in Paris. And from there on, basically, when I lasted around a little bit, and eventually finally from my university got a badge to go to the COP, but I had no idea what happens at a COP. I had no idea of, how to engage, what the negotiations look like, how can I really be meaningful there. So I was there for a week, came back and said, well, this was a great experience. But yeah, that's that. But the good thing it did was it made me want to come back in the field of environment and climate. So a few months later, I decided to quit my job and started volunteering in the field. And then eventually learned a little bit, as I was volunteering with some youth groups, learned a little bit more about international youth groups. When I went with this youth delegation to the next COP, I became a part of YOUNGO, which is the official mandated mechanism for engagement of children and youth in the UNFCCC. So I'll quickly just share a little bit about YOUNGO, about how young people engage in the international policy framework, and then from there switch a little bit to my journey on climate change education. So you should be able to see my screen right now. So YOUNGO, like I mentioned, is a mandated mechanism. So we're not an organization, we're not an entity, but we're a mechanism under the UNFCCC that works on engagement of children and youth. So this means that we're basically a sort of network of networks with young people across the world that want to be a part of the constituency. Children, of course, have, back in 2015 in the Paris Agreement, children have also been a part of it and have been mentioned. So this was already a starting point. Youth engagement in the UN is not new. So when in 1992, when the Rio Earth Summit held, and then out of that came out the 3 Rio Conventions, which is one is the UNFCCC, then the which is on climate change. Then we have the UNCBD, which is the Convention on Biological Diversity. And then is the UNCCD, which is the Convention to Combat Desertification. So this came all of, as most of you might know, this came out of the Rio Earth Summit back in 1992. And even at the Rio Earth Summit, there were young people who were taking part, who were advocating for youth. It might not have been coordinated, but there were young people always been part of the process, been part of the negotiations. So having youth engage is really not a new concept. But what really did work was that back in going back in 2005, when we had COP11 in Montreal, this was where officially, for the very first time, there was an international youth mechanism called the International Youth Climate Movement that got together before a COP to work on how young people will sort of engage. They got together to talk about young people and sort of build capacity in the upcoming negotiations. So this was the first formal gathering, as we know of today, that happened before the COP, and which leads to the first conference of youth, which I'll get to in just a little bit. And in 2009 was when there was a request made to officially recognize youth as an observer constituency. It took 2 years for this process to be completed. So this was confirmed in 2011. So now we've been confirmed as a youth constituency for about 10 years or a little more now. The mission is, of course, fourfold. So it's first to build awareness, knowledge, and capacity building of youth across the world, to just be able to come together and learn about the UN process, to also come together and understand how to meaningfully engage in such a complicated mechanism. And then, of course, collaboration, cooperation, and networks. So really building a network, because we have people from across the world that are part of this constituency, really learning how to collaborate, how can we learn from each other and really get stronger in this. And the policy, lobby, and advocacy is one of the primary ones anyway, because as we're a constituency of the UNFCCC, that is our primary area of focus, which is the UN intergovernmental policy process. And then youth action, so to get more and more young people to take action on climate change. And the vision is, of course, a lot more broader, which is to have a climate positive and just society. So a society in which we're living in harmony with nature and with the planet. An empowered generation that drive meaningful and impactful change. And this is happening at different levels. So it's happening at the UN, but it's also happening locally, it's also happening nationally. And a UN where young people are sitting at the decision-making tables and are being taken seriously and are not just a part of the conversation or sidelined as observers or just people that should listen to what's going on. So civil society in general in the UN is divided into 9 different constituencies. The decision-making process is an intergovernmental process. So if you're not part of the party delegation or the national delegation, it's hard to really be a part of it. So to come across this, they've created civil society constituencies. And YOUNGO is one of them. YOUNGO is, of course, the only one that has an age barrier, which is anyone under the age of 35 is allowed to be a part of YOUNGO. No other constituency has, of course, this age barrier, but they have different focus areas. YOUNGO focuses on children and young people. So the way we function in the constituency, so to ensure that we're in line to, because the intergovernmental policy process is extremely diverse, it's extremely complicated, but it also needs all elements, all sectors to really be on board. And we try to have a part of that in the way that we function. So we have a flat structure where basically nobody is really, so to say, the boss or like decides on what should be done. Most of our decisions are all taken on consensus, which means all the members, whether you are a young person, whether you're a youth organization, will have an equal voice in how you can participate. And it is the oldest and the largest children and youth constituency to any single UN body. So there are different UN bodies which might have their own youth constituencies. But out of all of this, YOUNGO has been the oldest and the largest. So we also have people who really look to see how YOUNGO processes are, how, what's going on, and to ensure that, they can also learn from mistakes or, things that YOUNGO has been doing in the past. So I won't get into detail of all of this for now. This is the membership for anyone who, if you're under the age of 35, you'd like to join. There's an organizational membership and there's an individual membership on this link. And I can also share the link later on in the chat. So the mode of engagement, basically how youth can engage, is broadly as individuals and organizations that constitute. And then all of this membership can decide to be part of working groups. So currently we have about 20 working groups that focus on different topics. And then we have an admin team, which is the global coordination team that does admin related things, but for example, does not have a decision-making mandate, but will ensure that there are, for example, selections if there is a representative needed, or just partnerships and so on and so forth. And then other two focal points that are elected at every COP. So I was elected with my co-focal point, Marie-Claire, back in COP25 in 2019. And at COP26, we've had new focal points that have now started their mandate this year. So currently we have close to about 10,000 individuals and organizations and 1,000 plus youth organizations that are part of the membership, and they can choose to work through these different working groups. Close to about 20 working groups, all of them are not mentioned here, but as you see on the screen, working groups focus on specific topics, and the one most related to climate education is the very first one here, which is Action for Climate Empowerment, or ACE. There are a lot of different working groups that focus on different topics, where education is, I think, a quite important segment of all of these. Some of them are very technical, like, for example, finance, technology, things like that. So adaptation, mitigation. So they have negotiating text, and it's a very, it's synchronous with the negotiation process. Some of them are more cross-cutting, like, for example, cities or human rights or nature. So whatever that might be. So this is a space for young people to really engage in any aspect that they might want to, whether there is a proper negotiating item under the UNFCCC or not. And then we have the operational side, and the one that I'm going to stress upon is the Conference of Youth. And the reason why we'll talk about the Conference of Youth right now is because this is where YOUNGO's policy work is usually done and formalized before a COP. So just jumping straight to the Conference of Youth here. So we have different versions of the Conference of Youth. For example, we have something known as the Global Conference of Youth, which takes place every year before the COP. And this Conference of Youth, or COI, is now going to be, so in COP26, this was the 16th Conference of Youth that we had. It was the 16th edition, and this year will be the 17th Conference of Youth, COI 17, and it always takes place in the city where the COP is, a few days before to the COP. And then we have different versions of this, like local or regional conferences of youth that take place a few months in the lead up to this. And we've also had, for the very first time last year, a virtual conference of youth, which we plan on building up in the years ahead. Now, the reason why we've had this was at the very start of the presentation, I said in 2005 in Montreal was the first gathering of young people, which was the International Youth Climate Movement. And this is now formalized into the COI, the Conference of Youth, where young people come together before the COP. And the aim is to build capacity of these youth to engage in the negotiation. So there's a lot of capacity building, there's a lot of training, but it has, of course, grown a lot beyond that. So it is really a space for workshops, it's a space for networking, it's a space to learn and meet young people from different parts of the world who are working on different types of actions related to climate change. So it's really a space to build connections, to really learn. When I went to my first COI in 2015, I was so impressed by everything that happened. And I was just like, wow, because I met so many young people, some my age, some even younger than me, who were doing absolutely amazing work and involving in different levels of whether it's decision making, whether it's community action, no matter what that might be. And the outcome of this COI is what we had last year, is called the Global Youth Statement. This Global Youth Statement focuses on the UNFCCC negotiations, so the upcoming negotiations. It focused on COP26 and has inputs relating to the negotiations from young people across the world. So the Global Youth Statement last year is a 77-page document. It's got inputs from about 40,000 young people from across the world, 140 plus countries, that have inputted through various methods. So through these local conferences of youth, through the virtual conference of youth, and through just an open form that they could, online form that they could fill in and input their views in the process. So this is the main outcome that is presented then to key decision makers. It's presented to the UNFCCC Executive Secretary, the COP President, heads of delegations, so on and so forth. So this is the process how we input into the negotiations. And I will just pause here for one moment and then just go on to another segment, which was basically my journey after all of this, engaging in the process. Just, how did I get into climate change education? And just to be conscious of time, this is not that long, so I will be very quick. When I started, interacting, when I went to these different COPs, the first thing that kept coming back to me was so much of the UN process is completely unknown, is something very, very new for us. And I had to teach myself through it a lot, and most of it I did by myself, because I didn't know who to ask. I didn't really have, so to say, a mentor who could really guide me, or a buddy who, knew something about the process. So when I, the biggest thing that kept coming back was, despite having a master's degree in the field, still the international process and this intergovernmental process was one of the most trickiest and most complicated spaces that I've been in. How do you expect young people, especially in my home country, in my city in Bombay, to even understand what's going on, to take action? We are not taught about this in school. No one ever talks about this. And now, of course, it's very different. More and more young people are talking about climate change. At least the general awareness is a lot more than what it was back in 2015, 2016. So it's a different story now. But at that point, there was barely anyone that really spoke about this. So it started very, very organically, I think about in the end of 2017, where this was the very first time I'd spoken to a group of kids and was talking about my experiences from COP23 and sort of just interacting with them. So this picture here is really the very first time that this happened. And this was sort of the basis of what I said, of the feedback that I got, and said, okay, this was helpful. Maybe this is what I should be doing. Maybe I should be talking to more people. Maybe I should be doing some sort of capacity building. And it slowly built on little by little. So basically, as this, it was me and a colleague who built this up. We went to a school where we studied and, did climate education sessions with some of the students there. So these are the more younger kids that we worked with. We've worked with then a range of kids, right from, say, about 7 or 8 years old until 14, 15 years old at that point. And really built it up. We did one-off sessions at local events. We also did sessions at different places. So we did whatever we could, right? Whether it was a workshop, whether it was a proper engagement with a school. And this slowly built up over the years into what is now becoming the Climate Initiative, which is now being formalized to have 2 streams, one focusing on children and youth and one focusing on adults. So we literally, this was, I think, another community engagement that we did at a housing society with the children of the area, talking through interactive sessions. As you see here, it's a little bit through a little bit of song and action with the kids to keep them engaged. So we just used whatever we could to try and, communicate and speak with children to really start working on climate education. So this is formalized. This was at COP 24 in 2018. A year after I had started working, and a year after we had started formalizing this a little bit, sharing my journey so far, which was very, very new at that point, with people at COP24. And now, as you see, we're a team that's, of course, working virtually since the past year and a half or 2 years now. Really building up. The team has grown after this picture was taken. So we're now a slightly bigger team. We also have a dog as part of the team in the picture. And we've been working with schools. We have now a proper module to engage with children and young people. We have different types of modules. We're also scaling up on this and becoming a formal setup where we can properly engage with schools, properly, build up not just the education, but really move from knowledge to action. So with an element of mentorship, with an element of guidance on what can be done, how we can engage, and how can you really, education is great and we've gotten good responses, but a small percentage of that really, translates into larger action, because a lot of the children are always often wondered with, okay, what do I do? I know all of this, but what do I do after, looking at the waste in my house, or beyond just switching off the lights and, my own personal consumption? Like, what can I do beyond that? And that is where the translation into action sort of stops, because it gets too overwhelming. And what we're trying to do is really guide them through this bridge to build up and take action, whatever level that might be, in an area, in a space that they would like to work in. So I will stop here. This is a work in progress and we're still building this up, but it's an absolute pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to answer any questions if required at any point.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Heeta, for sharing your insights, your experiences, and also your experiences in totally two different worlds, where you are where you are working locally, and also then you are trying to translate that local experience at the international level, and vice versa, of course. We don't have questions right now, Heeta. I think we could go ahead and maybe post the second session. We could have a Q&A session. So we are moving ahead right now. Heeta, we'll be going to Lucy and thank you for your presentation. So moving on to our second speaker for the day, Lucy Skelton. She is a 19-year-old Australian environmental and social justice activist. She's studying public policy and international relations at the Australian National University. She is the founder of the National Youth Advocacy Platform, the Student Voice Network, a coordinator with the Australian Youth Climate Coalition, board member of the Youth Coalition in the Australian Capital Territory, and the 2020 Student of the Year with the Environment Education Victoria. Lucy has interned with federal members of parliament and has been hired as election staff in the office of Anthony Albanese, the leader of the Australian Labor Party, for the 2022 elections. I'll say quite a lot as a 19-year-old. So Lucy believes that to create the wave of change that we need to secure a safe climate future, we must see proactive and passionate efforts in both activist and political spheres. She sees the climate crisis as the greatest challenge of our generation and is determined to see intersectional action driven by science, industry, and government. Thank you for joining us today, Lucy. If you're here, you can switch on your video and unmute yourself. Yes,
Wonderful.
Over to you. Over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Srishti. What a wonderful presentation, Heeta, and thank you so much, Nicola, and the whole team for establishing what a wonderful series of webinars. Can I just get a quick check in the chat? Can everyone hear me okay? And see me okay?
Yes, we can hear you. Yes.
Okay, I'll just get up my slides quickly and we'll make sure that we don't have any tech issues. Excellent, here we go. And I'll just put on a quick timer so I make sure that I'm not going to overboard. Oh, not share, not that kind. Excellent, slideshow. Wonderful, well, hello everyone. Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, Heeta. I would like to start with an acknowledgement of country. So I am currently on the lands of the Ngunnawal and Ngambri people, which you may know as Canberra in Australia, and I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and any First Nations people who may be joining us on this call today. Sovereignty was never ceded, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. And I'd also like to take a moment that, especially when it comes to climate, First Nations people, well, we can achieve no climate justice without First Nations justice. And First Nations people have been able to live off land for up to 60,000 years sustainably, and we have so much to learn from them in this movement. And that, you know, it's not something that we can just say at the beginning of a presentation, which I'm sure all surely know, but something that we live and think about every day when it comes towards reconciliation, especially in the country which I'm in, which is Australia. I'd also like to start by recognising my privilege privilege in this conversation. I have been extremely lucky to be able to do what I've done, and all the experiences I've been able to take advantage of. You know, being a white cis woman, growing up in a country where I can access education and I can spend a lot of my free time choosing to do this kind of thing, which is advocacy and activism and helping educate others on climate. So I'd just like to take a moment that my experiences won't reflect everyone else's, but I feel so lucky to be able to be here, and that we need to raise a lot more voices in this conversation, especially POC women and First Nations voices. Now, the way I'm kind of thinking of spending this 15 minutes or so is I want to bring you along what my journey looked like into understanding climate and education. What were my barriers? What was able to help me? And hopefully by kind of looking at that, we can examine what worked, what didn't work, and what we can do better for the next generation and how we can support people to bring them along this journey with us. So looking forward to seeing some embarrassing photos that I dug up on my Instagram. And I'd also like to say, if you have, keep in mind any questions, I'm more than happy to answer anything. And I've got my Instagram and my email at the bottom of almost every slide. So if you just take a photo of a slide, you'll have my contact details. Okay, so let's start here. So you're right, I'm going to go through like each age. Now you're probably thinking, I don't really look 13 in that photo, and you'd be right. I am not 13 in that photo, but this is the I feel like this image is the embodiment of my activism. Like, you know, broken arm, everything's pink, super excited out in the outdoors. Like, this is just what I like to think of was my childhood. But when it came to it, ultimately, I didn't necessarily grow up in a very environmental household. I had never heard of climate change or environmental proceedings. Like, I'm still teaching my mum how to recycle. Like, that's not the way that I grew up. I never went camping until high school, and it was on a school camp. And getting out into nature, although it's something I did enjoy, I thought of it as something extra, or just like gardening, it was more of a chore. So when I thought of environment, I thought of gardening, and then I thought, oh, green thumb's not for me. But it wasn't until I joined my school's environment team back in year 7, so when I was 13, that it really started to all change for me. I initially didn't even want to go to this. It was a friend of mine who said, you know, I'm going to go to this meeting, we'll see what it's like. And I wanted to make a new friend, so I thought I'd come along. And then I think I went to almost every single one since then. So I joined my school's environment team. The next thing I kind of want to say on this point of when I was 13 was I went to this conference. It was an Australian Youth Climate Coalition conference, and essentially it was a day of utter terror for me. Before this point, when I heard of the word greenhouse gases, I thought of a literal greenhouse where you grew literal green plants. My understanding was not in depth in any sense of the word. And when I was finally given the opportunity to understand what this issue entailed and how expansive it was and what this meant for my future, in all honesty, I was utterly terrified. I remember, you know, we were talking about the tipping point, and at that point it would seem to be 2050. Now it's 2030, which is even more terrifying. But it was said to me that it was 2050, and I remember thinking, like, my entire life was flashing before my eyes, that all my dreams and all my plans for what I wanted to do were now related to this issue and what we did in these years. So the way I kind of also want to structure this presentation is each year I'll go through some of the things we did, what I took away from it, and where we're going from there. So the first lesson I learned, and from that conference, from not caring, how did I get into a sense where I felt like I was not only cared, but I was proud to care, and I really wanted to do something about it. And the first thing for me was form communities of support. Joining my school's environment team was instrumental in me being able to have the confidence and also the motivation and the ease of access to taking action. I also just want to emphasize here that at 13, this is when I learned about climate change. I said before that I was terrified. I really felt as if all of the, you know, everything I'd been told up until that point, you know, you trust the government, you trust decision makers, you trust business, you trust all of these things. I felt like I no longer could anymore. I really did feel like my future had been ripped from my hands and I didn't know what to do about it. I'd finally been empowered with knowledge, but as so many people were, you know, it was very, I think it would have been very easy to slip into that it's too hard category and not think about it again. So I'm really glad that I was given the opportunity to understand. But that also leads to my second point. I feel as if I've always been a person that when I see injustice, I want to do something about it. And that's what I love doing with my time. Just a bit about me. I'm the kind of person where, you know, what do you really like in life? And I'll say aesthetic spreadsheets, which is a little bit more about where my head's at. But I felt as if in that moment that if I had just had the opportunity to learn about climate, if I had been able to understand what was going on, that I wouldn't have made the choices I had made up until that point. I was a very dramatic 13-year-old, I didn't really know what was going on, but I felt as if I wouldn't have made the choices I had made up until that point. So I had this notion from this point onwards that if only people were given the capacity to understand this issue, then they would want to do something about it. It's only that people don't understand it, that's why they're not. So that kind of framework of how I understood this and how I understood action has really shaped the way that I have gone about it, because that's what happened to me. I didn't know, so I didn't act. As soon as I knew, I acted. The next thing there, we're better together. I think that one of this, and I'm realizing that I chat forever, so I'll move on quickly. And also upskill, which is we are young, but that doesn't necessarily, and I've been young, but that doesn't mean that we're not passionate, and especially we've got the time. If you're able to teach us these skills as early as possible, this is not only something we can do, but something we can enjoy doing. So no matter how young we are, upskilling people. The next thing is, so I'm 14, it's 2016, and I had one of the best experiences of my entire life. Now this was called Ocean Youth. Ocean Youth was a 9-month program run by the Sea Life Trust, where for a weekend of every month, you would do something to do with the oceans. So for instance, on the Saturday of the weekend, you would learn about marine mammals and all the threats they're being faced by the oceans. And then on the Sunday, you would go out and do something with them. It was completely interactive and utterly fantastic, really world-changing when it came to this. And at the end of it, you had this 9 months, you had to come out of it with a project and something you could do about it. Just considering I'd been to the conference the year before, my real major passion was climate. So I started to do a climate project. So I started learning those skills. I also became a One Girl ambassador, which if you haven't heard of One Girl, I would very much search them up. They're a Melbourne-based charity organisation which supports girls to get their education in Uganda and Sierra Leone. And one of their really big main things that they're talking about at the moment is that by educating girls, you can help with climate, which is really fantastic. But what I really wanted to focus on this point, and why I thought Ocean Youth was so instrumental to my understanding of what to do, was that I felt as if I'd been equipped to a certain point with knowledge, but I hadn't been equipped on how to do something about it. I felt quite hopeless in a sense. So I remember going around to people that were my friends and family members and saying, oh my God, do you know about climate change? And they would say, yes, because, everyone's heard of climate change. But you'd say, okay, now do you know about it though? Do you know what it is, who it's going to affect, how it's going to affect them, what this means for our future? And ultimately, most people would say, no, it has something to do with polar bears, the ice caps melting, and something to do with the ozone layer. That deeper understanding wasn't there. And to this day, I still find that it's not when you have an in-depth conversation with someone about this issue. The other thing is that assuming people know, which they don't, but also assuming they know how to do something about it. Our country in Australia, and I'm assuming around the world as well, we lack a lot of political literacy. And I think this really is interesting with what Heeta said before, where we don't understand really how the UN works or how to engage in that, just like we don't understand, or it's not necessarily taught to any of us, how to get involved in politics. If I want to change something, if I want to understand that policy, how do you do a petition? How do you organize a protest? Should I write a letter to my MP? Will they listen? Do I run? There's so many things, and we're not taught how to do it. So this program was utterly fantastic for me because it actually gave me a framework to understand this is how I can do something about it. This is how you can run a campaign. This is how you can take that next step. And this is something that really has changed my activism. So I couldn't be more grateful for that. 15, getting faster. So basically, yes, in case you are thinking that is me and Jane Goodall, there aren't, like, I feel like I can brag about it, but you know, why not? There aren't so many crowds that would appreciate this as much. But yes, so I became middle school and para captain at my high school. I got involved with Zoos Victoria, so looking at the biodiversity and extinction rates, so looking at the 6 mass species extinction and conservation efforts to do with climate. And I also started a business. I decided that I'd learned about activism and advocacy campaigns, but I really wanted something that was going to be sustainable, where I could invest profits in a long-term return. So I gave a business a try. You might be thinking, where are her parents? What are they thinking? My parents were really fantastic. And they were like, yeah, sure, you can figure it out, have a go, which was fantastic. So that business is closed now, but it did show me that it was an opportunity, or how you can get involved and how you can influence the world through business or ethical business to an extent. So lesson 3 here is teach climate as a people issue, just not as an environment issue. Frame it in a way that's going to influence that person. So for instance, my mum doesn't necessarily care about trees or the ocean per se, but for instance, she's got this dream of being able to retire on a house on the beach. So when you talk about climate with her, for instance, I might say, well, due to sea level rise, you may not be able to insure that house or be able to do that, or maybe that house won't be there. Like bringing it towards what they're saying, but also helping them understand in a way that's going to make sense to them. I also think we've really missed an opportunity over the past few decades. Of course, we care about the environment, but we're put towards this whole marketing kind of thing that climate change affects far off people in far off places in a time that's very distant from now. But I think what we really need to be emphasizing is that it's right here, it's right now, and it's happening in your own backyard. So really emphasizing those things. Like, so for instance, when I said before, what do you think of when you think of climate change? And people would tell me polar bears, ice caps melting, and something to do with our ozone layer. I then invite them to think, well, maybe next time you think about it, think about a kid, think about a refugee, think about famine and so on and so forth. Not that I want people to be thinking about these things all the time, but having it as a human impact and consequence, because it's going to relate to a proportion of people that we necessarily haven't gathered within this movement before this. So moving on to the next one. 16, here we go, more embarrassing photos to come. I was then given the opportunity to be part of Earth Echo International's Youth Leadership Council, where I was then flown off to the United States to be part of media and activism training, something I am still ever grateful. So being able to have like an international thing and meeting people from across the world who are interested in the same things you are and what you can learn from a network. This is also the year that I started the Student Voice Network, which was really fantastic. And I got involved with the School Strike for Climate, which is what a lot of people attribute their own activism to, and why they got involved in the movement, which I think was absolutely wonderful. So something I like to think of with school strikes as well is that although people not necessarily changed policy right then and there, it brought people into the movement that had never considered it and empowered young people to feel like they had a say. You know, because when you feel like your future is being ripped from your hands, being able to say yes, but you can do something about it is a mental health tool that I think is beyond wonderful. So in this, I learned we can do more together than we ever could alone. The 200,000 people at the school strike in Melbourne, and looking around, just using schools as community hubs. Schools are in a fantastic position that we can talk to, like you can talk to students, parents, teachers, staff, local businesses, local council, and so on and so forth. Like, where can you get 200 people trapped in a room like you can in an assembly, forced to listen? So using schools as community hubs, you've also got printing balances and teachers and staff, so you can go ask science questions to the science teacher and business questions to a business teacher, and so on and so forth. So really using that as a tool for change. Also something that I'm really grateful for is that we decided from the get-go with the Student Voice Network that we wanted it to be virtual, that no matter where you are, no matter where you come from, as long as you've got access to a Wi-Fi signal, you can join us, that we can share our resources and that we can make a world of difference so you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So that put me, I was very lucky that we decided to become virtual from 2018 and not 2020 when COVID hit. I also got involved with waste plans, but I'm now realizing that I talk a lot more than expected. So I'll just skip through a few things. So learning to get the media on your side, being able to share And I think the real point I want to make here is that getting powerful messages out to a wide range of people, that we all have our own internal networks. Who can we reach out to? Our friends, our family, our workplace, family, friends, and so on and so forth. But if you can get the media on your side, if we can use platforms and social media that can reach thousands of people, your impact grows and grows and grows. So making sure that you get the media on your side and using tools that are bigger than your own in order to amplify your impact. 18, we're getting pretty close to the present here, considering I'm 19. This is the last point I really want to draw on, is that, and I'll skip most of that, is that at 18, I really learned that the avenue that I wanted to pursue the most and what I wanted to do was that I learned that I wanted to enter politics. That I found that, here we go, lesson 6, that politics and government has an unequivocal power for change. And if you're a Hamilton fan, I realized that I wanted to be in the room. I also think here that we need to, something that at least I've identified when it comes to climate, is that a lot of groups don't want to talk politics. And when I say that, it's not necessarily about bagging, but teaching people to have political conversations respectfully, in order to say, you know, not necessarily like I hate this person, although most of us, especially in the climate movement, can probably say we don't like a few of those people. You know, but how can we actually instigate policy decisions and politics so that people can participate? Because as I said before, political literacy, at least in Australia, isn't as high as I would like it to be. And if we really want to have these meaningful conversations, people need to be empowered to understand the system that this works inside. So being able to talk about politics and learning how to criticize news and policy. 19, very close here. I think this is pretty much just me moving to university, starting to study public policy and international relations, continuing with campaigns. I started interning with fantastic Australian MPs. So I've been interning with Heeta Murphy. She's a federal member for Dunkley. She is absolutely phenomenal. And like just being in the room, like for instance, they're saying, you know, I've got a 90-second speech. What do you think it should be on? And then me literally yelling in the other room to just like be on climate. She's like, yeah, cool. Suggest some speech notes. Being in the room is just utterly fantastic, and emphasizing that this is a pathway for change, I think is super duper valuable. So lesson 7, almost there. To secure a safe climate future, we must see proactive and passionate efforts in both activist and political spheres. So I felt like in my experience, I've been working in activist spheres, but more recently, I've been definitely endeavoring in political spheres. I do think there is a giant correlation there, but I don't think it can come either way. Because if we only work in political spheres, then you're not necessarily bringing the community along with you. And to actually have change that lasts, we need to be able to bring the community along with you. But if we do it only in activist spheres, then we're going to be missing out on the wide-scale change that policy can bring. And as you can be screaming as long as you want from the outside, it doesn't mean the political sphere is going to listen to you. So having them both interacting permanently and making sure that they're listening to each other, I think is inherently valuable. And also this last point over here, that under 18 can't vote, but they can still have political agency, and you don't need money to make a difference. I'm a very broke uni student, but you can still use your time and the resources that you have. It doesn't have to be, you know, just a mindset of what can I do with my time and what resources can I have for free and what networks can I play into. So 20, this year, I've gone back involved in advocacy more. So joining the AYCC once again, joining the board of the Youth Coalition of the ACT, and I'm getting really excited for an election year with politics, and working in Albo's office, which is just going to be communicating policy from the party to the general public, which I'm really excited about. And I really, before I want to end, because I know I've gone over my time limit, is that we all have to keep growing and growing. Mental health is paramount in this conversation, especially with young people. This issue is honestly devastating for so many people. Climate anxiety is very real, and burnout is very real. And especially as climate activists and climate educators and communicators, we can often feel as if we're not doing something, we're not doing enough. But being able to take breaks, you can't help anyone else if you're not helping yourself. So really wanting to emphasize that point here. Also emphasizing that this issue is deeply intersectional. As I said before, we cannot have climate justice without First Nations justice, and intersectional systems at play where we need to change the system in order to make this work. Everyone has a place in this movement. So you don't have to be upfront doing the speeches. You don't have to be doing the financials. You don't have to be doing the creative art side. There is a place for everyone. So using your skills to grow the movement is absolutely wonderful. To finish up here, I think I want to leave it on this point here. So as I said in my bio there, as Heeta said for me, the climate crisis is the greatest challenge of our generation, and I'm determined to see intersectional action driven by science, industry, and government. We can lead the way. You don't have to have a lot of money or power to make a difference, just passion and access to resources to teach, you how. Thank you so much for listening. If you would like me to present a workshop on understanding climate change or how to make a difference, please email me or DM me on social media, or if you have an idea of how I could help or how we could work together, please email me as well. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for sharing your phenomenal journey right from like 13, when you were 13, and also breaking down the lessons age-wise. It was really, really insightful for all of us hearing, and we're so inspired listening to your stories and also the learnings you had along these years. So you have a question, Lucy, and I would just take it and then we could open the floor for discussion. There's a question from Jim, and he asks that I see from the Student Voice Network website that you members have regular project needs. So could you tell us a little more about how you adjusted and advanced under the pandemic situations? So that's what he wants to know.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Judy. And great question, Jim. Something really, I think, different happened within the Student Voice Network space, because as I briefly said within my presentation, from the get-go, we decided that we wanted the Student Voice Network to be a virtual platform. That was done for many reasons, but it meant that we were already virtual. We had our resources set up. We knew how to use Zoom, and everything was set up to be virtual. So when the pandemic hit, and which was obviously very devastating, SVN grew phenomenally so, because what we found was that a lot of young people had more free time on their hands, and they were looking for a community that was going to be able to bring them through something that they could focus on. They were getting educated on issues because they'd never had this time before. So we really grew under these conditions, which I think we were extremely lucky for. But I guess with the pandemic has adjusted and advanced, really just becoming that community. So not just focusing on those project meetings, but those support. How can we support people with their mental health? How can we build a community that can bring people along with us? And adjusting projects as needed, really. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Lucy. And now thank you for your presentation as well. And now we are moving on to the open discussion session. So if there are any questions, we could take live questions right now to anyone who's Lucy or Heeta. So you can raise your hand and I could call on you and then you could ask your question. Heeta, we have some people who are asking for the YOUNGO membership link in the chat box. Yes, there you go. So you all have it in the chat. So any questions from the participants for Heeta and Lucy? If still other people are figuring out, I really like to know about I'm always excited to know, people do share their journeys and lessons which they had learned along that, on the activism side, on the education side, and then also trying to advocate and then trying to be in the whole policy domain. But I really like to know what are the challenges you face at all these levels. If you could start with Heeta and then go to Lucy on a few challenges, if you could share at the individual level you faced or while you were, figuring out how to take your initiative, ahead. That would be really good.
Yeah, I think one of the first challenges that we had when I thought of, doing this a little bit more formally was really trying to get in with schools, for example, right? If that was one area that I was approaching, there's always, especially in India, there's a lot of academic pressure. So schools really didn't have time for an additional session or two. And if I asked anything for more than one session, it was a clear like, oh my God, no, we can't do this. We don't have the time. Our kids have, the timetable is set and we have, academia to finish and, lessons to be taught. So really just pushing through the importance of why this should be a part of, everything that they're doing and not just taken as something that you do once, on World Environment Day or any other day of the year and then forget about. So I think the first was really just getting this through. It's still not the most simplest, I think, but I think it's changing a little bit now because more and more schools are now becoming aware. And I think the students are also asking for this a little bit. So it is changing, especially in India, but I still think there's a lot of work that we can do to really make this incorporated as part of your day-to-day school journey and not something that, is done when someone from outside comes in for a few days. And then I think after that, I think the biggest, one was getting the in, and then the other big challenge was really finance, which is why also it took me a really long time to really build in and scale up and really want to do this, because I did this because there was no finance on return. I did this, of course, because I was passionate about it. I was, and I eventually had 2 other people join me in this journey. So we did have a small team to sort of build up on it, but all of us are doing this on volunteer time. So we all had other things that pay the bills or other things that we're doing. And this always had a different priority, because if you have deliverables at work that pay the bills, you're not going to be able to do this immediately. So scaling up has been slow because of these 2 barriers. And now that I do have, or I've had some more free time after my mandate as focal point ended last year, I think I've been now gotten into it a little bit more full time. The team has also grown. So we still are currently doing it on volunteer time, but the aim is to make this into something that at least we can, get some value in return, not necessarily profit making, but some value on the time that we're putting in to make this happen.
Thanks, Heeta. What about you, Lucy?
Yeah, thank you so much, Heeta, for that. I think for me, it was really a consequence of not understanding. So having that access to information was one thing, and also access to know how to do something about it. I felt as if I was really lucky to have the opportunities that I had in order to learn those skills of how to take action, how to build organizations and do those experiences. But something I'm really committed to at the moment is making sure that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, which is why the Student Voice Network have our mentoring program, that other young people or people that want to lead projects, especially in these areas, and want to start educating others, we can have those meetings and then we can just say, here's what I learned, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You don't have to spend the hours, days, months that I did learning how to figure this out. If we can find someone else who knows how to do this already, let's bring them into this conversation. And also saying, I've been thinking a lot about this quote that I would say, and I think it might be on the Student Voice Network, but I often used to say a lot. If you really care about an issue, then why wait for someone else to solve it? Which is something I still believe rings true. But I think I want to make an edit today, which is, if you really care about an issue, then research it, find out who's already working in that space, join them if you can. And if not, then start solving it on your own. There are already so many resources and people out here who are working on these issues. So making sure that you can join them. But I think it's really, there are also many structures that are set up in place, whether it's politics or advocacy, that often the barrier is learning what they are and then figuring out how to get involved. And often that only happens once you've entered the front door, and you can have someone who's already inside tell you how. So if you can find people already in the movement who can open the door for you, super duper helpful.
Thank you. So I think the challenges are more on the accessibility side, whether it is resources or to networks or schools, or then on the financial side as well. So I think that is more or less the case when we are trying to sort of support an issue which is now a global crisis, but still we have to look for such resources. So I think if we join such movements and if we keep working, as you said, that no one is big or small, but we can contribute it in our own ways. But I think climate change education would be a foundation to that. And once, as Lucy also said, and Heeta also said, once you know about it, then you act on it. And that's how Heeta is also trying to translate her work into action. So I think we are a bit over time, 3 minutes over time, over time. So I think we will now have to close the webinar. And I would really like to thank you to both the presenters, Heeta and Lucy, for being here, and then also all of you who have joined us from different parts of the world. We will be sharing this recording via the Sustainability and Education Policy Network YouTube channel. The link will be shortly in your chat box. To learn more about the MECCE project, which Nicola mentioned earlier in her session, please visit the website. The website link will also be in your chat box, and we will also add a link to our email list, which you could use for signing up on various news on and articles on the project and how the project is making progress globally. Last but not the least, I would like to thank Nicola for hosting this webinar on such a different time zone, and thank you for all the support, Nicola. Thank you once again, and see you in the next webinar.